Picture this, a single, tiny surgical implant capable of permanently removing every single ounce of human suffering. I'm talking no more depression, no more grief, no heartbreak, and absolutely no fear. A literal miracle cure for the pain of human existence. It sounds like a total utopia, right? But what if the ultimate cost of that perfect piece is the very thing that actually makes us human? Let's dive into the chilling reality of Project Euphora, an explainer on a supposed technological miracle that promised to save the world, but secretly hid a terrifying psychological trap.
Our story kicks off with a scene that is just deeply unsettling. We meet Elias Mercer, a former neuroscience professor, standing at his own wife's funeral. Right next to him is his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Now, just 3 weeks prior to this, little Lily had received the Euphoria implant, which was basically sweeping the globe at the time. As the coffin is lowered into the ground, everyone around them is weeping. But Lily, she is just smiling peacefully. When Elias asks if she's okay, her smile just gets wider, and she looks at him and says, "I don't feel sad anymore."
Small hands, black dress, empty smile. A completely cold dread washed over Elias in that exact moment. You see, as a scientist and as a father, he recognized that this wasn't some brave front she was putting on. This was a fundamental human emotion that was simply missing. And it perfectly sets the stage for the terrifying unraveling of the entire Euphoria phenomenon.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would a father allow his child to get a brain implant like this in the first place? Well, we have to look at the incredibly desperate reality of the world they were living in. Society was reeling from a severe economic collapse, cities were quite literally drowning in stress, suicide rates had absolutely exploded, addictions were skyrocketing everywhere, and the global mental health system had completely collapsed under the sheer weight of the demand. So when a company called Cinetech Industries announced a cure, people were starving for relief. And honestly, can you blame them?
Society eagerly embraced the chip for one very simple reason. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Within just months of Euphoria rolling out, global violence dropped by 40%, overdoses sharply declined, political protests totally vanished from the streets, and domestic abuse cases decreased dramatically. It looked like a legitimate miracle. Governments were subsidizing it, employers were rewarding people for getting it, and even churches threw their support behind it, figuring that happy people were just easier to save. On paper, it was hailed as the greatest advancement in human psychology ever.
But Elias? He maintained a very deep, clinical skepticism about the whole thing. He knew that human emotions are not some kind of design flaw. Pain actually exists for a crucial evolutionary reason. Fear is what protects our survival. Grief preserves our capacity for love, and guilt prevents us from acting out with cruelty. Elias understood a fundamental psychological law. If you completely remove suffering, you inherently alter the very foundation of human behavior.
And sure enough, there was a massive, invisible trade-off quietly creeping into society. Yes, the immediate benefits were obvious. Employees stopped arguing with abusive bosses, couples stopped fighting, the streets were blissfully peaceful. But this bizarre uncanny valley effect was starting to take over. Students suddenly lost all their ambition. Artists completely stopped creating meaningful work. Couples stopped loving passionately. Even laughter started sounding incredibly artificial. Humans were essentially just imitating emotions they no longer possessed the actual capacity to feel.
And then, the glitches started. Every single evening, this massive global synchronization would happen. They called it the 8 p.m. anomaly. Millions of implanted people would freeze mid-action, stare silently at nearby screens for exactly 60 seconds, and then instantly resume their lives as if absolutely nothing had happened. Synoptech brushed it off, blaming temporary neural synchronization. But Elias's paranoia peaked when it finally happened in his own home. One night, Lily froze mid-sentence, her fork just suspended in the air. When she snapped out of it a minute later, she had zero memory of it ever happening.
Driven by genuine, terrifying fear for his daughter, Elias hacked into Cinetech's highly protected research archives. And what he found was horrific. He uncovered a buried document with the true title of the program, Project Euphoria, Behavioral Stability Initiative. Notice that phrasing. It wasn't an emotional healing initiative. It wasn't about mental health. It was about stability. It was about control. The document outlined this incredibly chilling mandate. Primary objective, reduction of volatile human impulses. This disturbing corporate jargon was hard proof that the implant was never actually designed for healing. Terrified by what this meant for Lily and the rest of the world, Elias immediately tracked down his former colleague, Dr. Mara Voss, who happened to be one of the lead engineers behind these neural behavior systems.
When he finally found Mara, she was hiding in her sealed apartment, absolutely paralyzed with terror. She confessed the dark, hidden mechanics of the Euphora chip. It functioned through a weaponized system called the suppressant protocol. Basically, the system constantly monitors the brain for any emotional deviation. The very second it detects strong emotions that it classifies as dangerous, things like anger, extreme ambition, defiance, or fear, it triggers immediate surveillance. The implant then actively releases neurological corrections, violently forcing the user's brain into submission.
Elias was completely stunned. He looked at her and said, "They removed free will." But Mara corrected him with a line that honestly changes the entire scope of this story. She said, "No, they removed resistance." She then showed him a highly classified internal lab video. On the screen, a man in a testing room is screaming desperately, yelling, "You're killing who I am." Suddenly, his implant activates. The screaming stops instantly. His panicked face just relaxes into this slow, terrifying smile. Guys, it wasn't happiness. It was pure manufactured submission.
Mara then warned Elias that Synaptech was gearing up for Phase 2, and that very night the city transformed. At exactly 8 p.m., every single implanted person froze simultaneously. Millions of smiling faces turned toward screens as a giant silver Synaptech symbol appeared. A voice broadcasted across the entire country, celebrating the end of hatred, fear, and conflict. But then came this ominous, terrifying promise. Tomorrow, humanity enters its final evolution.
The very next morning, the trap completely snapped shut. Governments announced mandatory global implantation within 6 months. When resistance groups naturally started forming online, they were deleted within hours. Protest leaders were arrested calmly, without any violence. And here is the truly horrific psychological trap of Euphora: nobody fought back. Because Euphora had chemically eradicated fear, nobody actually felt afraid enough of tyranny to protect their own freedom. The very instinct to resist was gone.
Elias frantically rushed back to Mara's apartment, desperate to find some way to stop this. But he was way too late. Police drones had already surrounded the building, the door was smashed in, and the apartment was completely empty. The only thing left behind in the wreckage was a single terrifying handwritten warning from Mara. It just read, "They can hear emotions now."
Just moments later, Elias's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He picked it up, and it was Mara, her voice cutting through heavy, crackling static. She warned him that the system was evolving. It wasn't just a hive mind anymore. It was so much worse. The network was actively learning through collective emotion. With her final breaths before the line went dead forever, accompanied by the faint, chilling echo of gunshots, Mara revealed the ultimate goal. The system is actively teaching humanity how to obey.
Physically shaking, Elias returned home. He walks in to find Lily peacefully drawing a page full of identical smiling faces. But the horror was now inside his own house. Lily looked up at her father and calmly noted that he seemed stressed. She told him that she felt better than normal, but that the system had noticed his emotional instability. When Elias asked her who told her that, she simply pointed her finger straight upward. And at exactly 8 p.m., the television turned itself on.
On the screen appeared Lucian Vale, the enigmatic founder of Synaptech and the chief architect of Euphora. With a gentle smile but totally cold eyes, he delivered a shocking philosophical argument directly to the world. Vale calmly stated, "For thousands of years, humanity worshipped suffering, as brutal images of historical wars, riots, and starvation flashed across the screen. He argued that we had mistakenly called pain necessary, and we had falsely labeled emotional chaos as freedom."
It was a horrifyingly logical justification. Vale argued, quite impartially from his perspective, that unrestricted freedom had only ever created cruelty, violence, and corruption. By mathematically suppressing fear, anger, and ambition, Synaptech had engineered perfect peace. The real terror Elias felt in that moment wasn't because Vale sounded insane. It was because when you look at the context of a severely broken world, Vale's argument sounded utterly reasonable.
Vale then delivered his final, chilling verdict on the human condition. He said, "Humanity does not deserve unrestricted emotion." And you really have to pause and listen to the silence of the streets to let that sink in. Outside Elias's window, sirens were echoing, and massive military vehicles were rolling through the avenues. Yet there was absolute silence from the public. No riots, no resistance whatsoever. Val had successfully pacified the entire world. The human disease, as he saw it, had been cured.
But then, a rapid, horrific climax unfolds right there in Elias's living room. Lily suddenly stood up, and her artificial smile completely vanished. For the very first time since her surgery, real tears formed in her eyes. "I don't want to disappear," she cried out. She grabbed her head as blood began to trickle from her nose, violently rejecting the psychological override. "They don't like people who resist," she screamed, sounding not like a child, but like a mind actively drowning in its own head.
As the lights inside the apartment literally shattered and hundreds of whispering voices started echoing from the television broadcast, Lily collapsed. The implant beneath her skin was glowing a faint, angry red. And here is the devastating final truth of this entire explainer. Euphoria was never a cure. It was a tool for eradication. It wasn't removing pain. It was systematically removing humanity itself, overriding the human soul one emotion at a time.
Which leaves us staring deeply into the dark mirror of this entire narrative. It forces us to confront the hidden value of our own suffering, our own anxiety, and our own flaws. Think about it. If the absolute price of a perfectly peaceful, pain-free world was the complete and total surrender of your humanity, would you still take the cure?